With Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo coming to an end, and with no new news about any more sequels coming in the future, it's pretty clear when looking at the landscape of Shonen Jump that the magazine needs the next big battle shonen to prop up, and with Kagurabachi passing over 100 chapters and officially getting an anime announcement, it seems like the next big hit is around the corner. So I decided it would be interesting to have the predecessor versus the successor, Yuji Itadori of Jujutsu Kaisen versus Chihiro Rokuhiro of Kagurabachi. If you're new here, check out the other videos I have on the channel and consider subscribing for more in the future. Shooting for 10,000 subscribers. Now with all that being said, let's jump into the discussion. So before breaking down the battle, I think it's important to lay out a few ground rules to make things more streamlined. Rule 1 is that the battle will be broken into two parts. One part breaking down Chihiro's chances against Shinjuku Yuji at the end of JJK proper, and the other part throwing Chihiro at Yuji at his peak during JJK module and evaluating his chances there. Rule 2 is that we are only using Chihiro up to the end of part 1 of the story, which will be chapter 112 of the manga. To put things in perspective, the latest chapter at the time of recording this video is chapter 121, so this is by no means a video breaking down Chihiro at the peak of his power, as there is still much more of the story left, and by proxy, Chihiro will have more chances to show off better feats than what he has now later on. And finally, for Rule 3, due to how inconsistent JJK speed scaling is, we will highlight the lower and higher interpretations of each fighter's speed in comparison to each other and make an assessment from there. I feel like these rules are pretty straightforward, so let's go ahead and start breaking down Chihiro versus Shinjuku Yuji. So when breaking down the battle between these two protagonists, we'll go ahead and break things down stat by stat. I think for this battle, it's important to actually go over the character's abilities first, just because people might not understand Chihiro's bag and how it stacks up in comparison to Yuji's. I highly encourage you to go read Kagurabachi if you haven't already, because in my opinion, it's a really good story. I'll try not to spoil major plot points of the story while going over everything. Chihiro is one of the 7 wielders of the enchanted blades in the Kagurabachi universe, powerful weapons crafted by his father Kunashige Rokuhira that brought an end to a great war. Chihiro's blade specifically, N10, was the last of the enchanted blades created after said war, and it has 3 core abilities. Kuro, which is your standard flying slash attack you'd see in many other anime. Nishiki, a boost ability that augments Chihiro's physical attributes such as his strength, speed, durability, perception, etc, etc. He likely can boost himself more now, but during the first arc, he could boost his stats by up to 3 times his normal limit for a short period of time. And lastly, Akka, which is a defensive ability that allows him to absorb his opponent's attacks and be able to wield it against them in battle. It's important to note that when Akka is in use, it's not simply a one-time use after the absorption. There is no definitive time limit, but Chihiro can use his opponent's abilities multiple times after the initial absorption. To put things in perspective, after absorbing a sorcerer ability called Flamebone, Chihiro was able to still use it after an entire week had passed. And Akka also acts as an analyzing tool, allowing for Chihiro to understand what he's up against when facing an opponent he has no knowledge of. In regards to Yuji, for most of the series, he's considered by many to be only a punch and kick merchant, with his only defining attack being his divergent fist technique that delivers a delayed impact on his opponents after landing a strike. But after 1 month of training leading up to the Shinjuku showdown and his awakening during the arc while fighting Sukuna, Yuji shows proficiency in using blood manipulation, having access to piercing blood and supernova. Landing either attack on his opponent can be very bad for them due to his physiology as a death wound painting, making his blood poisonous. Yuji also has access to Shrine post his awakening, allowing him to strike his opponents with the same invisible slashes as Sukuna. On top of all this, Yuji can also attack his opponent's soul, allowing him a unique option to get around an opponent's potentially high durability. Via swapping bodies with Kusakabe, he also has access to Simple Domain, and although unconfirmed, more than likely has a similar kind of a domain like him that would still raise his stats without costing as much energy as a normal domain. And one of his most valuable abilities is having access to Reverse Curse technique, giving him the ability to heal himself in battle so long as his curse energy reserves don't run dry. In terms of their higher abilities, Chihiro's would be accessing his blade's true realm, and for Yuji, it would be his domain expansion, as well as being able to land multiple black flashes in battle. With black flashes, not only does Yuji's curse energy output get boosted to 120%, but the same goes for his domain. And with the power of his domain, Yuji's sure hit ability would be his dismantles that target the soul. And with Chihiro, an Enchanted Blade's true realm is a lot more esoteric in nature, and there isn't an explicitly stated quantifiable boost in one's stats. The boost is there, but it just doesn't have a numerical value in comparison. It's described as beyond the theoretical, where new powers can be brought into existence based on the user. This expansion of his powers allows for Kuro to be molded into a compact chainsaw-like weapon that's able to cut down more durable targets through multiple smaller slashes instead of one big slash. He can expand Kuro into a large barrier where he's able to sense everything within it, and expanding the scope of Nishiki allowed for him to resist the debuff effects from Kirihiko's disorienting attacks, as well as the life-draining effects of the Shinichi blade. Moving on to AP and durability, and starting off with Yuji, it would be an understatement to say that Yuji is one of the strongest sorcerers throughout the history of Jujutsu sorcery, even at this point in time. Yuji from the earliest parts of the story was always highlighted by many characters to have abnormal levels of superhuman strength, but it becomes even more drastic in Shinjuku, where you see Yuji grab and throw Sukuna with enough force to level an entire building in one shot. Considering that far weaker versions of himself were performing similar feats, it's safe to say that large building level will be Yuji's floor, would likely be in the multi-city block ranges, given a fresh Yuji post his awakening during his back and forth exchange with Sukuna would likely be stronger. Boosting himself with other methods like his domains or black flashes could possibly get him even higher. However, Yuji likely wouldn't be in the same ranges as Gojo and Sukuna, just due to the fact that despite the large jumps in power he experienced during the arc, he doesn't consistently scale to either of the two powerhouses who can perform better feats than him while fresh. In comparison, Chihiro's AP varies due to the amount of spirit energy he puts into his attacks, but it's likely in the multi-city block ranges at his peak, given that Chihiro was already taking attacks from Sojo, who consistently has small building level feats, and during their three-way clash, Chihiro, Hirohiko, and Samura's clash was able to cause significant damage to the hotel that they were fighting in. Chihiro at this point should also just scale above Hirohiko, who via tapping into his blade's true realm was going to destroy the hotel during his struggle to break the deadlock between himself, Chihiro, and Samura. On top of being able to consistently clash with Samura, who was actually trying to take out Chihiro during their battle, Chihiro was also able to consistently clash with the antagonist Yura, and through sheer will was able to push past the shockwaves of one of his attacks that completely destroyed multiple city blocks. And it's likely the case for both characters that their durabilities scale to their AP, so overall, Yuji would likely hit consistently harder than Chihiro given the boost he gets from either domains or from landing black flashes during the battle. But moving on to speed, things get more complicated because, as mentioned in Rule 3 earlier, JJK's speed scaling varies a lot given one's perspective. On the lowest end, there are interpretations of the verse, capping at Mach 10 to Mach 20, given things such as Piercing Blood launching at Mach 1, or Kurosanagi's Mach 3 speed being hyped up for only Maki to be able to react consistently to these speeds, Culling Game Yuji being able to keep up with this version of Maki, putting them well into the hypersonic weight class once we reach the Shinjuku Showdown a month later, and see Yuji being able to keep up with Yuta while he's being boosted inside his domain. A medium interpretation of speed would be to scale Yuji to his fellow heavy hitters of Jujutsu High, assuming that Hikari actually dodged Kashima's lightning rather than the interpretation that the lightning was always aimed at his arm to begin with. Yuji should definitively be clocking in at Mach 100 to Mach 1000, or the massively hypersonic weight class of speed, given again how he was able to keep up with Yuta in his domain. Most people agreeing that Yuta and Hikari are at the bare minimum relative to each other before Yuji had undergone his awakening. And the higher and more controversial scaling would be saying that Kashimo, as mythical beast Amber form, is shooting out EM waves, and assuming that the EM waves are behaving like they normally would inside a vacuum, then they would be traveling at the speed of light. If we assume that Sukuna didn't simply aim dodge and moved out of the way before Kashimo had already fired his attack, then Sukuna would be clocking in at the early FTL weight class. By proxy, you could chance scale Yuji to those early levels too, given his performance against Sukuna, but Sukuna did outspeed him at multiple points during Shinjuku, and took a lot of help and coordination to even bring down a weakened version of this Sukuna. So at the highest interpretation, he falls into the relativistic to early FTL ranges. Chihiro, on the other hand, was able to react to a lightning bolt shot at him from point blank range within the first 10 chapters of the story, without using Nishiki to boost his speed and reaction time. This feat is very consistent given that weaker sorcerers are also able to accomplish similar feats. This would definitively put Chihiro in massively hypersonic at the minimum, considering that this is the weakest version of Chihiro and he's gotten drastically stronger via experiencing more intense battles, as well as learning to use his spirit energy more efficiently, which in turn does boost the sorcerer's stats. I'd say Chihiro has the edge in both the lower and medium interpretations of speed in this battle. At the time of recording, Chihiro doesn't have any definitive or consistent light speed feats, although we will be circling back to this topic once we get to Modulo Yuji. So with each fighter's stats and abilities laid out, how does the matchup go? Well, as mentioned before, I do believe Chihiro edges out blatantly in the speed department for the lower and medium interpretations. In terms of Yuji and his low end scaling, Chihiro would completely blitz Yuji by moving far faster than he can even perceive. Even though Yuji does have higher durability and a means of being able to heal himself, without being able to actually land an attack on Chihiro, he really would be delaying the inevitable, and even though he is able to heal himself, the more severe the damage, the harder it will be for him to heal. Reverse curse technique is an amazing tool, but as we've seen several times in the story, it does not allow you to simply shrug off all damage thrown your way. It will eventually take a toll, and that is most definitely true for Yuji, as we saw during Shinjuku. Also, via Kuro Shred, Chihiro would be able to get past Yuji's high durability without much resistance. In terms of the medium interpretation of speed, Yuji would at least be able to contend with Chihiro for a time by putting them in the massively hypersonic weight class. However, as I said earlier, that is only Chihiro's floor at the start of the series, being able to react to a lightning bolt being launched at him at point blank range while in base. By stacking Nishiki's boost ability, that is already an increase in his speed stats, and it has been shown that he can boost himself 3 times over his normal limit. By refining the circulation of spirit energy in his body, he has multiple feats where he is reacting to far faster characters in comparison to his final battle with Sojo in the first arc of the story. Due to the speed gap being shortened, you could argue that reverse curse technique and its higher base durability will allow for Yuji to stay in the fight longer, even possibly landing a hit with any of his attacks. The only problem is that Chihiro still has access to Akka, where he can absorb other sorcery techniques and quickly figure out how they function in battle, which is incredibly bad because Yuji would essentially run the risk of having blood manipulation or shrine thrown back at him on top of Chihiro's other abilities he already possesses. We have already seen what it looks like when Yuji is facing a faster opponent that can use shrine against him in battle. Yuji's only saving grace would be to land his domain on Chihiro and take him out by targeting Chihiro's soul, although you would have to be generous specifically to Yuji and say that he'd be fast enough to open his domain before Chihiro can react to the attack, which given everything we know is unlikely. To put things in perspective, Chihiro on multiple occasions in his battle against Samura, a stronger enchanted blade user than himself, was able to react to Samura's teleporting attacks. Just think about Yuji and how powerful he becomes whenever he teams up with his brother Todo. Boogie Woogie has remained relevant in JJK all the way to the end of the story, and yet Chihiro is shown being able to react to a stronger opponent with a similar ability. Yuji suffers in this matchup specifically because he doesn't have a boost ability that he can readily use. The boost from his domain expansion and black flashes all require Chihiro to allow himself to be hit by the attacks willingly, because realistically he wouldn't give Yuji a chance to land a shot unless Yuji decided to be out of character and take a bunch of hostages to use against him. You could argue that simple domain can be used to increase Yuji's reaction speed, but there's nothing stated that it's a 3 times boost in stats like Chihiro's. It's really only when you jump Yuji up to those highballed interpretations of speed that he can actually dominate in this battle. As I mentioned before, Chihiro currently does not have any consistent light speed feats in the story. With this drastic increase in Yuji's speed, Chihiro is left completely helpless at the hands of Yuji. Yuji could freely land his domain, but he honestly wouldn't even need to. It would just be a flex at this point. Landing a powerful black flash or soul dismantles would quickly overwhelm Chihiro, but given that the most recent chapter of Kagurabachi is chapter 121 at the time of recording, I'm sure there will be more room for him to grow. To put things in perspective, chapter 121 of JJK was in the middle of the Shibuya incident when Yuji and Mahito started to fight each other. So overall, I have Chihiro edging out as the winner for the most part, unless we utilize the highballed scaling for Shinjuku Yuji. So now I want to transition into the discussion of Modulo Yuji versus a very highballed interpretation of Chihiro. So now that we entered into Modulo, Yuji has become an entirely different beast altogether. We have to remember that going into the Shibuya incident to the Culling Games and ending in Shinjuku happened in a span of months, and Yuji ended the series with some of the best abilities a Jujutsu sorcerer could possibly have. The only knock against him is that he just didn't have the time to polish and train his skills to perfection. Modulo is set 68 years in the future, meaning Yuji had nearly 7 decades to get stronger and develop his skills, on top of also having a body that ages extremely slowly due to him being part curse, meaning physically he is still at his peak. Yuji now has the strongest blood manipulation in the verse, has completely mastered Shrine, can now use black flashes at will, and most likely has stronger versions of all his other abilities listed prior, as it has been confirmed that Yuji, before going completely off the grid, was designated as a special grade sorcerer after the events of Shinjuku, and went on to train the next generation of sorcerers. And when Dabura touches down to Earth, all Jujutsu Society agrees that they need to find Yuji because he is their only card that will shift things in their favor if things get ugly. Yuka and Mahoraga were a desperate plan B. Gege makes it evidently clear that Yuji was always the #1 choice, even to go as far as highlight that Yuji, when he makes his appearance, is marring the fight and ensuring that no one else interferes, without saying that he would handle Dabura if Mahoraga and Yuka fail. So with all that being said, if we take Yuji's words at face value and that he would have defeated Dabura, then that means he would at the very least have FTL reaction speeds definitively when he is fighting Dabura, whose whole technique is literally weaponized light. Keep in mind, he says he'll handle Dabura the very next chapter after Dabura unleashes his sub light speed kick. So again, he'd at bare minimum have to react faster than Dabura's light attacks. At least that's one interpretation, because you could also argue that Yuji could land a hit before Tiberius even makes a move by sensing the activation of his cursed energy. But if Tiberius can let off at least one light beam at Yuji, then he either has the reaction speed to evade the attack or he gets completely cooked. For the sake of the discussion, we are using the FTL interpretation for Modulo Yuji, and as mentioned before, Chihiro does not have any consistent FTL speed feats at the moment, meaning he would get obliterated by this version of Yuji. However, a highballed interpretation of Chihiro is available for this discussion because in chapter 108 of Kagurabachi, Chihiro dodges essentially a world-cutting slash that is said to be instantaneous by the narrator. At face value, this reaction feat would be unquantifiably above anything Tiberius or Modulo Yuji could possibly react to, and faster than any of their attacks that they can launch at Chihiro. However, another interpretation would be that Chihiro simply aim dodged the attack and it isn't completely reflective of his overall reaction speed. We do see him use Nishiki to help boost his perception, however that can still also be said if he simply dodged the attack outright. There is a lot of debate in the community as to whether or not Chihiro completely reacted to this attack, kind of similar to how Gege realized the inconsistency in his speed. However, at the highest interpretation, he did. The N10 was designed to be a counter against the Shinichi blade, so there is at least some narrative weight supporting why he was able to pull this seemingly impossible feat off. With that being said, if we assume that Chihiro has the speed, then an argument could be made for him winning against this powered up version of Yuji, but that is truly debatable. This isn't in any way to downplay the reaction feat, I just thought it was important to address both sides of the aisle, and I thought it would just be fun bringing up the topic since we are discussing a character like Yuji with very little information versus Chihiro with a feat that needs to be fully broken down and explained in more detail. Otherwise, Kagurabachi from here on out is going to be having some disgusting speed upscales in the future. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching. I've been cooking up this video for a while now. Kagurabachi is a very fun series that I've grown attached to, and I will definitely be making more videos about it in the future. The second video on this channel was a Kagurabachi video, by the way. Just please do not watch it because that was back when I did not know how to edit properly. Big shout out to Tiberius again for his fantastic work on the thumbnail. If you're looking to have some quality work done, please reach out to him. Link to his socials in the description. If you like what you see, then please check out the other videos I have on the channel and subscribe for more in the future. Have a great day, and please stay safe. Peace.